very special edition of Mélange by LTTS. I'm so excited to be here with you today in this beautiful cafe in South London, where it's very sunny today, so we're very lucky with the weather. And today is a special day because we are going to talk about a very important topic today, and also how LTTS has really come together as a family this year through COVID, etc. So today it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Lax, who is the Chief HR Officer at LTTS. So Lax, who's joining me from Mumbai. Good afternoon, Lax. How are you?
I am good, Pareen, and it's monsoon. It's raining time in Mumbai, but I am so glad that it is very hot and summer weather in London. So I'm very glad for you, but it's a little bit rainy in Mumbai.
Yes, I heard it's monsoon season in Mumbai, but thank you for finding a great place like where you're in to speak today. It's very exciting. So, Lax, without further ado, I'd like to get started and ask you one very important question around company culture and the role of company culture during a crisis like COVID-19. So, Lax, what has been the role of company culture at LTTS during COVID, and how have you approached company culture before, during, and during COVID-19?
Yes, culture is an extremely important element in any organization. And I would say that there is nothing called as a culture for a good time and a culture for pandemic time. A culture is something that takes time to embed in an organization. And in L&T Technology Services, we have a culture which encourages employee welfare and safety at all times. And therefore, when this pandemic happened, it was very natural. One of the first things that my CEO told me is, Lax, please ensure that our employee health and safety is given the topmost priority, and we are not going to compromise on that. And that became the bedrock of how we dealt with the pandemic. And clearly, companies which have very strong cultures, the leaders are able to demonstrate a very, very consistent behavior. And that's what we did. During the pandemic, we clearly articulated three principles. The number one was employee health and welfare, most important, and we will not compromise on the employee health and welfare. Number two, we said that we will follow the government guidelines in every geography where we operate, whether it is about closing down our office or maintaining social distance, whatever may it, we did that. And the third is that we said that every leader, whether it is at the highest level or at the front line, will be available for our employees for any support if they need, right? These were the three principles we articulated, and it is directly emanating from the culture of L&T, which is about keeping employee at the heart of everything.
So it sounds like you already had a great company culture before the pandemic. It sounds like you didn't wait for a crisis to happen to build and really nurture that company culture. So tell me, Lax, I want to dig a little bit deeper here. And what role played communication and transparency to build that company culture during the pandemic? In particular, what about sharing good news and bad news with your employees during the pandemic? How did that affect building a great company culture?
No, very important. I think, we did so many levels of communication. There is nothing known as over-communication during a crisis, right? So we had a quarterly connect with the leadership team at the highest level, from the CEO downward. Everybody were on the virtual calls to explain, number one. Number two, we had CXOs writing letters. I wrote a letter every month to our employees across the company telling us what we are doing, what actions we are taking to ensure that employee health and safety is never compromised in our organization. So there were several layers of communication, and also most important, during the pandemic, we communicated to our employees that we are not going to do pandemic related separations, nor are we going to do any compensation cut. In fact, barring the CXO level, no employee saw any compensation cut in the company, which was a very, very important piece of communication to our employees, telling them very clearly that they and their families, our employees and our families, are very important to us.
That sounds really powerful. And just one last question on company culture, Lax, is what was the role of learning and development in fostering your great company culture during the pandemic? In particular, what was the role of learning and development of your managers and your team leaders during the pandemic to really foster that great company culture during the pandemic?
No, again, fantastic question, and thank you so much for asking me, because we were one of the first companies to roll out work from anywhere, WFX certification program. As part of this certification program, we ensured that every first line manager is certified, is trained on how to dealing with the pandemic, is trained how to measure performance and how to ensure that the employee performances are properly monitored. But more importantly, we trained them and we ensured that the managers know how to demonstrate empathy during this time of the pandemic. And that was very, very well appreciated by all our first line managers and the leadership at large.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you did invest a lot in your team's learning and development during the pandemic to really foster that company culture. So thanks for that. Now, I want to move on to a second question, Lax, and I think it's a very important topic as well, especially during a crisis like COVID. I want to talk about the future of work, because many organizations like LTTS have gone through so much change over the last 18 months, and it's fair to say that the world of work has changed so much in the last 18 months. So with this new flexible work or hybrid work or remote work, the question I want to ask you, Lax, is what's the best way? What's the best way to move forward in the future of work? What's the right way for organizations to create a successful work environment in COVID or in hybrid work?
Yes, I think, first of all, I want to say that COVID is not behind us yet, right? We are already talking about the wave 3 and wave 4 in the US. We're talking about wave 3 in India. In fact, we're talking about wave 3 in Mumbai, where I'm speaking to you from. So really, the situation is very, what I can say, is not very, very clear, right? It's just unfolding. And I will say that it's a very fluid situation. And as the adage goes, right, fluidity is the name of the game and flexibility is the antidote, right? That's what I say. And I think we are adopting flexible work practices, right, all the time. We are not saying that we want to lead the way. We don't want to say that this is a best employment practice that we have invented in LTTS, but we are very, very clear that we want to continue to demonstrate flexibility in our work practice. We are okay to follow the leaders, right? We don't want to be path breakers and saying this is the first company to do this or that, but we are willing to wait, right? As long as our customers and our customer deliverables are not impacted, we are okay to demonstrate flexible work practice, and we are in a wait and watch. I know that newer employment models will emerge. I know that newer workplace practices will emerge, but we will be very flexible and very agile in adapting to it as the context changes and newer work models emerge.
Got you. And specifically about flexible work. So when we talk about flexible work policies, some research has demonstrated that certain workers, certain employees are a bit worried about adopting flexible work. In particular, for example, mothers or working mothers, they might be a little bit concerned about embracing flexible work because they think it might affect their career, they think it might affect chances to get promoted, or they fear it might affect their chances to get a pay rise. So how did you address that challenge internally at LTTS? How did you address that barrier that some workers, some employees may have about embracing flexible work and not being affected negatively by that?
No, I think we had a very good performance management policy. One of the things before the pandemic itself was that if any lady employee sees a performance rating drop by more than 2, in a sense that if we have a 5-point rating scale with 4 being the highest, if somebody's rating scale moved to 2, then we ensured that the HR got into the loop and we checked why the rating has gone down by 2. So that practice was already in vogue. So there was nothing that we had to do anything different. while the pandemic happened, right? We continue to have that policy.
That's great to hear. And one last question from me on that. It sounds like you did a great job at collecting employee feedback, and you're really close to your employees' sort of feedback and listening to their concerns. What was the role of collecting employee feedback to create flexible work environments during COVID? And how important was it for you to collect employee feedback during COVID to create the most performant, flexible workplace?
No, thank you again for asking this question. We were one of the companies, we were actually very worried whether we should go with our annual survey. We went for the survey in the middle of the pandemic. We got 5 percentage point improvement in the participation rate. Typically about 75% of our employees participate in the survey. This year, 82% of our employees participated, which was a redemption for us, which was a proof of the pudding that employees actually gave us a big thumbs up in not only participating, but they also told us they support us by the participation rate. And they also tell us that they expect us to act on the feedback. In fact, we are in the middle of taking several actions based on the feedback we received from our employees, and we call it the Project Rendezvous, and that is in progress at this point in time, and I'm extremely glad to share with you about it.
Wow, it sounds like you had some great results with your employee feedback during COVID, which is amazing. So, Lax, I'd like to move on to one last theme, which again I think has become key over the last 12 months, and it's a theme that we see in the media, etc. And so, I really want to talk about employee health and well-being. I really want to ask you about mental health. So, I want to ask you, how did you approach employee well-being and mental well-being and physical well-being during COVID? What was your approach?
I think, like I said, employee health and wellness was our first principle, right? But it also includes mental well-being, and we are, very, very clear that we have to support our employees for their psychological well-being as well. And very recently, I read a news report coming in from the US where we spoke about the suicide rates coming down by 6%, and I was very, very surprised. And for the first time in 4 decades in the US, the suicide rates has come down. But I was digging deeper into that report to find out how has the suicide rates come down, and I found that the sale of guns have increased, the misuse of drugs have increased, so a lot of other issues have started surfacing, and I'm sure the pandemic, while the suicide rates could have technically come down, but I think there's a lot of stress in the system. There's a lot of employees who are working a more number of hours. There's a lot of other interpersonal stress that's been come up, and clearly we want to support them. One of the things that our CEO Amit Chadha talks very passionately is about building an affiliative leadership culture. An affiliative leadership culture is all about building a culture of trust in the organization. And a culture of trust happens in the organization only when the culture is of collaboration, the culture is of being helpful, the culture is of being hopeful, the culture is of being resilient in the organization. And that's what we are trying to build in the company. Again, we are in the middle of another project, what we call the Project Avatar, which is again underway, and we hope that we will be able to build further, coming back very strongly from the pandemic in terms of building an affiliative leadership culture that is very enabling, collaborative, empathetic to our employees, and it will stand us very well in the future.
Amazing. Well, Lax, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the role of company culture. We talked about the role of supporting employee well-being and mental health. And we talked about the role of flexible work. So I really want to thank you for your time. I wish you all the best in continuing to becoming one of the best places to work. So all the best for the future.
Thank you, Perrine, and really thank you for taking time to talk to me today. And really, really appreciate you taking time. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.